Hi, everybody. Welcome to the February 2018 edition of the Paul Crouse Show on the Star Nations Radio Network, where we talk with a broad range of international guests about living life better and making a difference in our rapidly changing world. Today, we'll be talking with psychiatric nurse practitioner Frances Robbins. I'm going to put her on right now. Oh, it says hi. No, show. I'm trying to get. Oh, say hi, Frances.
Hi, world.
Okay. Now I'm gonna put you away a minute. I'm still trying to figure out which to click here. All right. Anyway, the title of our show today will be Toxic Relationships and how people have toxic relationships, not that you have a toxic relationship with Frances. Anyway, before we get to our conversation, let's talk a little bit about myself. My name is Paul Crouse. I'm a spiritual teacher, advisor, and life coach based here in Kyoto, Japan. I help people who want to make changes in their lives. What I do with people is I help them figure out what you want to do and guide people through the process. If you have problems in your life, I can help you with that, and I deal with it from dealing with the inner stuff, and which is different from what Frances does. Is she's a medical professional, okay? But anyway, I help people deal with the things in life that can be difficult and finding a way to move forward. Anyway, I do this via worldwide. I do this online using Skype or whatever kind of video calling we have, or face-to-face here in Kyoto. So if you want to contact me, you can go to my website, which is paulcrouse.com, C-R-O-U-S-E, Crouse with a C. Since most people can't remember how to spell my name, they think I'm like related to Tom Cruise or something. Anyway, you can go to tootallpaul.com, T-O-O-2, Too Tall Paul. I'm 2 meters tall or 6'5", and it'll take you to my website. And if you have a chance, make sure to listen to some of the other and watch some of the other great shows that we have here on Star Nations. You can listen to the shows live or at any time in the archive. Just go to starnations.org, where you can find the radio shows and lots of other great content. And also, you can go to my website, paulcrouse.com, to go see any of my past shows, including the ones I've had with Frances here. And make sure to stick around right after this show, which will be Julie Hedges' Tarot Journey show will be on right after that. So, without any further ado, let's see if I can put Frances on here. Frances. There she is. All right, and then we'll put our names up, nice and purple and everything. How you doing today, Frances?
I am fabulous, Paul. And I just want to thank you for clarifying that this is not a show about toxic relationships with Frances. Although I'm sure there's people out there who are like, I'm glad it's finally coming out. But
we all have all of our toxic relationships we have had with Frances.
Middle school.
Well, not that I've ever had any toxic relationships there. I'm sure ex-girlfriends are just going, oh, anyway.
I think it's a matter of perspective, right?
Yeah.
But I will tell you that that this is the month of love, right?
Yes, the Valentine's
February. Month. And so Valentine's can bring us incredible joy, and it can bring us incredible feelings of pain and hardship. And It just seemed like maybe this was a good topic for this month.
Okay, cool. Being that I'm trying to be cognizant of what's going on here, we have a bunch of people. We have Rob in the chat room there, or it's actually on the Facebook page. We have Rob who says you are intoxicating, Frances.
Uh-oh.
Sonia. All right. Yeah, I'm not so great with typing. I'm not really good with having. I try to focus on one thing, and what we'll focus on here is the person in front of me on the other side of the world. So where are you today?
I'm in Chiang Mai, Thailand.
Okay.
And we're here for probably till May. I mean, I am going to go to a little trip to Okinawa, Japan next week, though.
Okay, great. Awesome. That's where you used to live, right?
Yes. We're going to go visit some folks and then head back here to Chiang Mai again.
All right. Get back to bowing again for a little bit. Did you bow much when you were in Okinawa? Because you were in the military base, right?
Yeah, no. Not like I should have.
Well,
not like I should have.
I don't think you really want to be the bowing part in the military. Anyway, we'll move past that.
Yes, it was.
So today,
this.
So let's just say real quick what your qualifications are. It says you're a psychiatric nurse practitioner. What the heck does that mean?
So that's a great question. So basically that means that I am trained to be a therapist, much like a psychotherapist. And I'm also trained to be much like a psychiatrist in the sense that I prescribe medications. So I do therapy and I prescribe meds. Some people need both. Some people need only therapy. Some people, medications are a good fit as well. Everybody's a little different. And because I'm a practitioner, I will say this. I always start with whatever the issue is a person comes and talks to me about. I start with, is there a medical reason for that? And then we rule out and we make sure that there's nothing going on medically that's causing their symptoms of mental concerns. And once that's happened, then we start working with, is it therapy, is medications, what's the best fit for you?
Okay. So if I called you in common speak a shrink, would that be accurate? Or disaccurate?
Some people think that is
derogatory. Rude? Okay. Well, no, but common people.
But I will tell you that my military, especially the Marines that I would see, they like to call me Whiz or Wizard.
Whiz
or Wizard because I mess with their brain.
Okay. All right, Wizard.
I know.
So we have our.
But really, some people say shrink, some people say therapist. I don't care. Call me. Some people ignore me. They don't even want anybody to know they know me.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. One of the reasons I ask you this though is because a psychiatric nurse practitioner is not necessarily that sounds like it's a clinical term that the common folk don't necessarily know what it is.
That's correct. And
okay. So I'm trying to do a little translate.
Universal. It's not a profession that's universal. When I'm in Thailand, they don't know what a nurse practitioner is. So it's much like a doctor, except it's with therapy as well.
And just for clarification, you are a licensed medical practitioner from the United States. And which states are you licensed to practice medicine?
And Washington. Oregon and Washington, and then I also see clients internationally.
Okay. All right. Great. Just want to clarify that. But also we want to know what your credentials are, so you know what you're talking about, right? So you're as a mental health practitioner, you deal with mental health issues and health issues. Okay.
Correct.
As opposed to I'm a coach and a spiritual advisor, which I deal with very different things. Sometimes people come to me and they want me to act like a therapist. It's like, no, you need to see a professional person for that, right? So I just want to. Sure. So there's people have different. We want to clarify what your qualifications are and what you do, so that people can get the benefit, because you want to talk to the right kind of person for whatever your issues are. Yes.
Right.
All right. So if you're possessed by a demon, maybe a Catholic exorcist is what you need.
I can help with that too, I think.
Okay. Well, I had a story once. Well, we have time. I had a story once when I used to work for a newspaper in Michigan. I was working on a book. There was a local history book, and it was trying to track the local history based upon the local religions, because the immigrants who came in, they typically lived in a certain part of town because of the churches that were there. Okay, so one part of town on the west bank of the town were a lot of the Polish immigrants, and there was Catholic churches there, and then later there were Hispanics, and a lot of times the Hispanics and the Polish were near each other because there was churches there, and so forth. Well, we were working late at night, and I was working with, I was doing the photo research, and there was the guy who was the city editor of the newspaper. He was also working with me. It's like 2 o'clock in the morning. We're trying to get this book out, and one of the guys that was working with us was the chaplain for the Catholic. She's the chaplain for the police force and the firefighters in the city, and he was a Catholic priest. And he got a phone call, and he answered the phone, and he said, He goes, well, it's really late right now. What's the problem? Yes. Is there anything flying around the room? No? Well, it's really late. I'll deal with this in the morning. And he hung up the phone, and me and the city editor look at this guy at the same time going, is there anything flying around the room? And he goes, yeah, it was a suspected poltergeist. And he goes, people don't know what to do, and they call 911. And so he's like, so they call me. And we're like, does this happen a lot? And he goes, a lot more than you would imagine. So he's talking about us.
If there's things going around the room, I'm going to show up.
Yeah. Well, also he would talk about like the sometimes this sort of wacky stuff would happen, and the people would go to their Protestant ministers, and they're like, no, you need to go see Father Tim because the Catholics still do that. With Protestants, we gave up all that, and well, some of them, depending upon. Anyway, toxic relationships. Let's segue to our topic of the day. So, what would you define? What do you mean by toxic relationships? Frances?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. So, first of all, a relationship isn't necessarily when I think of relationship in this setting, it can be in any realm, an acquaintance, a job, a relationship like an intimate relationship. But when you're in a collaboration or or working beside somebody or working in an entity, and you leave that experience feeling pretty crappy frequently, or you leave that experience feeling like, oh my goodness, there must be something going on, I'm a problem, and you come out of that encounter worse off than you did when you showed up, and that happens on a regular basis, I think that's what I would define as a toxic relationship. It could be your employer, it could be your spouse, it could be your roommate,
friend.
Yeah.
So, and you also to clarify, it's something that happens regularly as opposed to a one-off deal.
Right.
Or something common, because of course there's so toxic. So there are so many ways to go into this topic. On my website, I have a blog post that I get tons of traffic to, and it's called "Don't Let an Alcoholic Destroy Your Life." If you actually Google "alcoholic and lie" or "alcoholic and liar," it usually comes up on the first page in Google, which is pretty amazing. And I wrote this just from my experience of being a recovering alcoholic and sobering out. I've been sober now for like 26 years, something like that. I've lost track of the time, but it's a long time. Right. And typically the people that I come up if you read the comments in this like, oh my gosh, these horrible stories that are mostly women tell about being in relationships with alcoholic men. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it actually seems a lot of what I do is help women get away from these men. And then the first thing I tell everybody is go to an Al-Anon meeting if you can. But there's people from other parts of the world that don't have any access to anything like that. Mm-hmm. And some of the stories are really heartbreaking. Mm-hmm. So let me ask you this question, because it's something that's very difficult to define. What is codependency?
Well, it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's where a person is so dependent on somebody else, or they need someone to be dependent on them, that they can't seem to function. You'll see that a lot in alcoholic relationships, the codependency that happens. Basically, you have a partner who has an addiction. Mm-hmm. And then you have the other partner who doesn't necessarily have an addiction, but they are so engrossed with that other person that they are they almost allow that other person to do their thinking for them. They allow that other person to manage their own life. They literally are dependent on that other person for more than just financial reasons. And emotionally, they're dependent as well.
Is that sort of like, how shall I say? Are they kind of like addicted to them, or entranced by them is using a different word that's not clinical, but it seems like some folks that have this, there's like the alcoholic that, like when I was a drunk, I knew I was drunk. I mean, I intellectually understood it, but but I didn't really know it down deep until I got over denial. Denial is a wacky thing, because you don't know you're in denial until you're out of denial by its sheer definition. Right. And so codependent people, or people in this sort of a very unhealthy relationship where there's an addiction like this, it's sort of like they're an addict, or sort of like I'm going to use the word entranced, because it's a little bit like someone has a spell over them. I'm using the metaphor.
I think sometimes too, their relationship is starting to define who they are, or does define who they are. And it's like, hello, my name is Frances. My husband is an alcoholic, or I have to watch over my husband, or I have to make sure that my partner is doing all these things. But your self-esteem is connected to that other person. Your value, your personal value, is connected to somebody else. And so when something isn't, when you need to be needed, and that need is what fuels your own self-esteem. So people that are in those relationships for any length of time, there comes a point where they really need to seek help too, because and that's why Al-Anon and those support groups are so important, because you lose your own identity into that toxic relationship.
So one thing I just wrote down here is sort of the need to be needed. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you were talking about also the people identify themselves based upon the relationship.
They can.
Something like that?
They can. No, I was just going to say, like, they might say, they might plan their day or plan their life around the behaviors of their addicted spouse or addicted partner.
Okay. How about that relative to can we contrast that to a healthy relationship? What would be the opposite contrast? Because sometimes the contrast is easier to see things.
So a healthier relationship would be to give ownership of the problem to the person who has the problem. And then the addict, like in the case of an alcoholic, the addict, the healthy spouse or healthy partner would say something like, they would have to understand that problem belongs to that addict, not to themselves. And they have to still protect their own livelihood and integrity and their own self-esteem. But getting all caught up in what's going to happen or not happen with that person's addiction can be very devastating. So honestly, a healthy person or more healthy person usually has really clear boundaries. And when they've crossed the boundaries, then whatever the decision was made, like if you cross this boundary, this is going to happen, happens. And sometimes that means being separated. That means sometimes having to say, I don't want to even see what's going on with you, so I am leaving this relationship until you can get this fixed. Sometimes they'll do that.
Okay. Clear boundaries. That's the other thing I wrote down here. What other elements are there? So again, we're talking about. So what we just spoke about was very specifically having to do with relationships in regards to an addiction, or at least one person has some sort of lots of inappropriate behavior. Here we're talking about addictions, but addictions can be more than just, like, for example, gambling addiction or some other sort of addictions, or that people are this very unhealthy behavior that is self-destructive, and that the relationship with the person that is together with them. How about some other sort of toxic relationships? I guess the thing that I want to talk about here, and it's kind of a little difficult, it's such a broad topic, is where to jump in, is, well, how to identify, like, I'm in a toxic relationship. So for example, let's take something a little bit different than husband and wife. Let's say talk about like a friend relationship, or maybe something that's like a little less bonded than a marriage.
Okay.
What are some warning signs, or what are some things that are unhealthy that the other person might be doing and that I might be doing, and so that I understand it, not to make me feel guilty, but none of us are saints.
No. I think it really does come down to boundaries. How often are those boundaries crossed? If you have, I don't know, let's talk about maybe an employer setting.
Mm-hmm.
There's no contractual obligation unless you're in the military like I was, and there was a contractual obligation. But if you're in a employer or in a relationship, and well, even in friends, there's no contractual obligation, like you were saying. If the encounter with that person or that entity is upsetting to you, then that's like the first thing, right? So why am I upset when I have to go see Paul? Why is it I see Paul calling me on my phone, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to answer this phone call. So there's usually some sort of a negative feeling that happens when you see that person. Not necessarily you, Paul, but another person. Mm-hmm. And usually that's because they're emotionally draining. They are usually very negative. They complain a lot. They're attacking you personally. And if you leave that encounter or that event or that situation feeling pretty bad or upset, it's toxic. It's just like, how can I tell a difference between a toxic drink and a non-toxic drink? When I drink sour milk or spoiled milk, I'm going to get sick. Mm-hmm. It makes me nauseous. It makes me vomit, as opposed to a regular glass of milk. They might look the same. They might even smell the same at some point, but there's, just looking at somebody, you're not going to know. It's that afterwards, after the encounter, how do you feel? And the steps that lead up to that can be really slow. And sometimes you don't know it's happening until it's happened. And when you start having those feelings of that just overwhelmingly disgust feeling, and it upsets you to have to see this person, and maybe you're even avoiding this person. You yourself are avoiding this person because you don't want to upset them. You don't want to, you don't want to be a problem to them. So it's just easier to not answer the phone or answer the text or, unfollow them from Facebook, whatever that is. Those are all signs of a toxic relationship. And then you have to start really looking at, okay, why am I allowing this to continue? What's going on with me?
Okay, that's a question I wanted to ask a little bit before. In just a moment, I'm having some sound issues. I'm gonna ask you a question, and I'm gonna pop off the screen and reload my stuff here and an audio thing. So just so you know. So the question is, what if, for example, I find in myself that I have a lot of these relationships with people? If I'm looking around and just about everybody I'm having these relationships with, what about that?
All right, good. I'll be happy to answer that. So what I hear you saying is, what if I'm a toxic magnet? What if all these toxic relationships are happening to me? Well, that's a time to really do some self-reflection, because you also may be toxic. And sometimes that can attract that same relationship. But if you find yourself and you've gone from one bad relationship to another, you might have to do some time looking in the mirror, because there may be some things that you're doing. There are all kinds of therapists out there in the world that can help you, but you need to kind of figure out why it is that you're attracting all these people. And so what I see is people who have unclear boundaries, who are extremely emotional and like tell everything about themselves in the first 5 minutes of meeting somebody. Those are usually not good signs. And if you're that way, then it's time for you to really do some soul searching. So going to a therapist, which is what I would recommend, or coming to like myself as a psychiatric nurse practitioner, going and talking to someone about what's happening in therapy, I can tell you for myself, in therapy, I ask really difficult questions. And I would ask questions that they may not want to hear. And I would ask things like, are you, how often are you connecting with this person? What is it that you're doing that you feel like is working or not working? And then turning it around, how would they feel if that was happening to them? But if you go from relationship to relationship to relationship, and it leaves you feeling pretty crappy, there's something that you're doing that's attracting that kind of personality to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and until you make some changes, you're just going to keep attracting those kind of folks to you.
Okay. That can be really challenging for people, actually, to have this realization.
Yes.
Now, the other challenge. Now, I was raised Catholic. Okay, and so one thing with that, there was a lot of guilt involved, and I'm not criticizing it or whatever. It's just there's a lot of culturally there was a lot of guilt. So to feel like if I'm having these sort of relationships, then I feel bad about myself. Then there's sort of this can lead to I feel like I'm guilty. It's all my fault. How can we overcome that to take the step to go get help, for example? That feelings of guilt and shame. This also I would talk about shame before a lot. It goes hand in hand with, for example, alcoholism and being in these dysfunctional relationships.
Well, the truth is, a lot of people don't, because of the culture, because of their religious upbringing, because of where they're at, it's kind of their lot in life. They almost come to that place where this is the way that life has dealt me. These are the cards that life has dealt me. I'm just going to be miserable. And that happens. It really is unusual in this when people seek help. And sometimes I think it's because it takes a different mindset, truly, to stand back and say, is this happening because of me? Am I the cause of this? And then therapy can be not really obtainable to some people. Like they just don't have it available to them. Like we talked about this before in your neighborhood, it's just not something that's available. So I think that's why probably a lot of self-help books are so big, and people are just trying to always kind of look and see what's going on. When I have people that come and see me about relationships, it's usually is because they want to get help for the other person. Like they haven't even come to the place where they're thinking, okay, maybe it's something with me. And that takes time over therapy for them to start looking at, I'm really involved in that. And the other thing I think we always teach, and you probably do this as well in your sessions, is we have control over our emotions. So the fact that when I have an encounter with someone who is toxic and I feel so crappy afterwards, that's my emotions that I have control over. So I can take that relationship and that encounter and I can have a completely different feeling, as opposed to feeling like, oh, I feel so bad and it's so terrible. We naturally, I think, fall into that. Something's happened and now I'm taking on that emotion because of that person. But really our emotions are really because of us. How we perceive that event is how we act on it. And if I'm in a relationship and that there's signs like that, and I start thinking, man, that person was really kind of making me feel bad, or that what they were saying was really upsetting to me, I start looking at, why am I upset? What's going on? And then is this relationship something that I want to pursue? Because it's going to take a little work on both sides. You know?
Or is this a relationship I need to get away from?
Right. And I'll tell you as well, many, many, many times I will talk to my clients and they'll be in some really horrible situations. And I'll say that. Have you thought about ending this relationship? Whether it's a friend, or work, or spouse, have you thought about ending it? And usually, I'm typically the first person that's actually come out and asked them. And then they'll tell me, well, I could never leave. If it's a job, I can never leave. I have my retirement. Okay. So how can you work in this environment and still control your feelings? And what can you do to make things better for you inside this? And again, it goes back to our own internal, like our locus of control. It's our internal. What do we have control over? We have control over our own emotions. And in jobs, what I tell people is surround yourself with things that bring you joy. Remove those things out of that space that upset you, that you look at and think, oh, I can't believe this, and it brings this negative memory. Toss it. You don't need it. If you're in your home and there's things around you that are upsetting, and you toss them. So you want to have an environment that is helpful and loving and nourishing to yourself. But you're the one who has the control over your emotions. So if you're in a toxic relationship, there's going to be some effort in how are we going to work through this. You make that decision. Is it worth the effort? And frankly, sometimes it's just not worth the effort. So you move on.
Okay. I have a couple more questions here. One, I want to ask you first, there's Tanya Kim asked something about ADHD and hypersensitivity. I'm going to come to that in just a moment, but I want to sort of follow up on what you were saying. So what about if we're in an environment, say we work in a place where there's a relatively large amount of people, and of course we're going to come across some folks that are toxic, just in the nature of the work.
Yes.
Okay. What are good ways to assert ourselves? Because a lot of times having clear boundaries, what that means is we have to be assertive to our wants and needs. Yes?
Yes.
Which means assertive is sort of like the midpoint between, I guess, where's the camera? The midpoint between passive and aggressive is assertive. I assert my wants and needs in a way that is civil. Oh, unfortunately, the phone is ringing. Just a moment.
It's probably one of your toxic relationships. Calling.
Yeah, I think that toxic relationship probably a bill collector or something. The wonders of the modern age. Hey, we're not. This isn't CBS or anything.
Just checking to make sure. My phone's on silent too.
That was just the regular house phone, so I don't know how to hung up on somebody.
One of those. Wow.
Anyway, so getting back to that, how to be, maybe just speaking a little bit to assertiveness, and especially in a work environment where it isn't always easy to up and leave.
No, and I can give you an example. I actually had a person talk to me about they worked in a large room, and there was one printer in the room for, I don't know, maybe 15 users. And there was a person who was sit closest to the printer and was kind of the printer Nazi. And so this person managed the printer.
Okay.
And if you wanted to get certain kind of things printed, or if you were getting something off the printer, there was always a comment that came with it. And it was just upsetting to the person who needed to use the printer. So they were avoiding using the printer. Okay, that's how they dealt with it. Except they needed to use the printer from time to time. So what we talked about and kind of did some role playing is if the responses of that person are pretty expected, and you know what the printer Nazi is going to say, you already kind of have this little role play in your head of how you're going to respond. So what I talked to my client about was beginning that encounter in a positive light. So instead of what I was seeing and what they were talking to me about is they already knew it was going to be a pain, they already knew it was going to be confrontation, and they would just go up there get my paper off the printer and just walk out. But they were very negative, and it was all about, and there was all this anxiety and anger about having to go to the printer Nazi, because the printer Nazi was going to say something like, well, that's a lot of pages. Oh, I can't believe it. You only allowed so many pages a day, and whatever. It was confrontation. So I suggested that you walk up and you say, good morning. How's it going? And start more of a positive interaction with that person, because everybody that was interacting with this little printer Nazi person was always negative. So over a course of several weeks, the person came back to me and told me that made a big difference. And it's something as silly as just being nice to somebody and saying, hello, how are you today? Oh, I got to get my printer paper. Thanks for helping out. Just that kind of stuff. And then we started talking about, how do you think the little printer Nazi feels? Like, she probably didn't really want to be responsible for the printer paper, or,
right.
Is there somebody above her that's checking on her?
Yeah, well, and also being compassionate to people in the fact that if this person is really negative, there's probably reasons for that in their life, and they're probably pretty miserable, and they just want to share their misery. So that's a great idea of also feeding negativity, and negativity, what do you get? Negative.
Yes. And then I always use this as a go-to for myself personally.
Mm-hmm.
When I have an encounter with someone who is just, so difficult, and I was not expecting it,
mm-hmm.
I just think to myself, I am so thankful that I don't have to go home with you. I'm so happy I don't have to go home with you. And that's what I think in my head. And I instantly start smiling. And there's the end of that.
There are often times I come back from seeing, maybe I'm out with another couple or whatever, or see some relationships, and then I come home and hug my wife, really tight, and go, I'm so glad I married you. Yes. Great.
So I think I'm so thankful I don't have to go home with you, because that would really suck.
Yeah. I found one thing that worked well for me. There was a book I read in the 90s. It was called The Celestine Prophecy. With inside of it, it's sort of like a New Age primer, but they talked about life energy. And so I think you can perceive the life energy as the spiritual people say it really exists, or it's metaphorical for scientific people, because rationalists, you can't measure this energy, therefore it doesn't exist. Anyway, the way he's talking about energy was that we have our own energy. When someone's alive, like in Asia, it's the idea of is that you have your life energy, and when you die,
I completely believe that.
Excuse me?
I completely believe that, and I am a scientist.
Okay.
In some way, thing.
Oh, I've been trying to nip it in the bud right there. Anyway, so this idea of life energy. All right, and of course we get our life energy from some ways. It's like we eat, and there's chemical reactions in our body that helps fuel us. And of course we need the nutrients from the food, and good healthy food will help us have better energy. But also within relationships. Oh, I lost her. I lost Frances. Okay, well I'll just keep talking, and she'll come back in at some point or another. So when we're feeling good, we have a strong energy, and when there's Frances again to the broadcast. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. How you doing?
I'm good.
So getting back to the idea of the energy. So when we're strong and healthy, and if we're spiritual, emotionally, everything's going well. We have a strong, bright energy. When we're not being well, we get drained.
Right.
You've probably seen people that even the pictures of the saints and sages. They're always really bright. And the people that are really down and depressed have this they're lacking this energy. Mm-hmm. And so that in the book, the guy talks about how a lot of places where we get our energy actually is in our human interactions. Okay, our interactions with people. So imagine we have the young lovers who are infatuated, and they meet each other, and this is Susie, and this is Tony, and they're like, oh, lovey-dovey, all the time, and, Susie goes walking off talking about Tony. Oh, Tony's so wonderful. He's so wonderful. And Tony does the same thing about Susie. Oh my gosh. And all of their friends are like going, oh, all right, I'm tired of this.
Right.
But they're both, and this is like what everybody really wants, that time of being infatuated and in love is like, oh my God, wonderful. Because each person is injecting huge amounts of energy to the other person. It's just like getting a hit of heroin. Oh my God, this is awesome. But that is, as with infatuation, that's not sustainable, because at one point somebody stops giving that energy for whatever reason. They have to go to work, they get sick.
Yeah.
It's just whatever. It stops, and then the other person's like, what? I'm not getting this anymore. And so they may start taking it. And one way of taking it is either being manipulative or being, starting to have fights and so forth. So when I read this book, this was actually quite revelatory to me about my reactions with people. I started watching people and the energetic dynamics amongst myself and other people. As you said, some people you talk to and you just feel really drained afterwards. But then there's other people you talk to, you feel really energized. If you have a great conversation, you feel really energized.
Right.
And for me, when think about this energy, like who's draining my energy? So, for example, maybe I had an argument with a friend, and I might feel bad about it. I may be angry the next day or the next 2 days, and my wife, she knows, like, that person's still taking your energy, Paul. Don't, my thinking about them being angry about it and focusing my attention on that, the energy gets drained. And in Tai Chi, they say that the chi flows where the mind goes. The energy flows where you put your attention on. So if I'm putting my attention on the thing that is upsetting me,
right,
that's where it's, if I'm putting my attention on my fears, that's what's going to be in my life, because I'm sitting in my fears, I'm swimming in my fears, or whatever.
Correct.
So anyway, that I found that was very helpful for me to observe and also my own energy. When am I being manipulative? Like, am I doing? So one manipulation might be poor me. Oh, poor me. My life's so bad, and da 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 da. That's a way of getting energy indirectly from a person. Or aggression is another way of getting energy. And this idea worked really well for me to understand. Okay, this is what's going on here with myself and with other people, and ultimately, if I'm going to change my mind, I have to change my mind if I want to change my life.
You do.
And finding the right methodology to do that. But first thing comes awareness, is to be awake. I don't like to be awake. To be aware of, okay, this is what my situation is, and this is how I'm participating in it. I have responsibility in this. Other people have responsibilities too, but it's really easy that it's always the other person's fault.
Yes.
Or it's always my fault. It's
participating. Yeah, that's what I usually see in couples therapy, is it's their problem. It's their problem.
Yeah. Let me go back to, there was a, Tanya Kim asked, she said, I wanted to ask about ADHD and hypersensitivity. How can someone with ADHD manage the negative feelings from spending time with people? That's the question. So
with attention deficit disorder, sometimes I don't know the situation entirely, but if you're taking medication that helps you be more focused, if the medication if the dosage is too high, then you can become really hypersensitive. So sometimes that happens. And otherwise, with attention deficit disorder, I usually see the opposite. I usually see people that are so scattered and so unaware and so unfocused that they have no sensitivity to things. So I wonder in this context if it's in relation to maybe someone who is medicated and they're just super focused on a particular situation, but they don't maybe know that they're over medicated. Maybe that's the case. Or Or caffeine is also, caffeine also increases your hypersensitivity, especially if you take medication on a regular basis and then on top of that you drink caffeine. It can really crank up the focus. So if that was the case, I think journaling is really helpful, where you just kind of writing down your thoughts about the situation, maybe why you're so hypersensitive, if indeed you are, and then really start reflecting through your journaling what's happening. You had mentioned something very key about being in denial, like you don't even know you're in denial till you're out of denial, because that's the method of being, the whole point of being in denial. But with anything that happens to us in a cognitive level, if we're not open to it or even aware that there is a situation happening, we don't know that it's happening because we're not aware of it. So if you're hypersensitive, I would write down what that means, what is happening, and then maybe validate that with either a therapist or a friend or someone and say, is this relationship this way, or am I just being, sensitive? And still, even if you're being sensitive, that's still your emotions that you have control over. So learning what it is that person is triggering or saying to you that is upsetting to you, and then working backwards to try to alleviate that. And it may be founded or it may not be founded.
Following up on that, so there are some folks that are more, shall we say, emotionally sensitive than others, right? I mean, some people are more, obviously there's many different kinds of people, but some people are more. So the question is it that they're more emotionally sensitive, or is it that there is not lack of knowledge as how to deal with emotions? So, for example, sure. It seems to me, and when I'm working with people, and things that I've learned about my emotions is, if you repress the emotions, they just go down and they just become this. We have emotions, and that one of the sort of Buddhist things is sort of feel the emotion, feel it in your body, and let it feel your emotions, let them flow and let them go. Just let it there, because it will pass. So when you're angry, the anger will go pass. It doesn't mean that I have to act on it, that I have to be, smashing things with a baseball bat, but to feel it. Where do I feel it? Where is it in my body? Is it my belly? Is it my throat? Okay, I'm clenching my fist. I'm angry, and sometimes what I have to do if I'm angry, I also have to go into a room. Sometimes I have to go, because there's so much energy there. I put myself in a place that I'm not going to either hurt people or freak them out. I'm a big guy, so it's still, that freaks out my wife because she's Japanese. You just don't do that here. Okay, but there's other times where I feel the emotion, so like I'm feeling sad, we'll feel the sadness, but try not to hang on to it. And trying not to hang on to it is the hard part, because then we think about stuff that keeps us...
Right.
And then there's this thing in your head that keeps going around and around and around. So the question is, and I don't know what the answer is hypersensitivity, and I don't know very much about this specific term, is it the fact that some people are more sensitive feeling-wise, or is it that there's a feedback loop?
I think it probably is more of a feedback, honestly, unless I would really question what's going on. That's why the journaling is so good. Mm-hmm. There's something that's very magical, voodoo-y that happens when you take your thoughts and write them out. When you transfer them on paper, you don't have to show this journal to anybody. You can toss the paper, you can burn it, shred it, whatever you want to do. But getting those thoughts out of here and onto paper is really super therapeutic. When someone is hypersensitive, there's usually something going on that they need to kind of work through. And what I would see a lot, especially in the military, with my military clients, is they just don't have time to deal with things. So horrible thing has happened, trauma's happened, life totally sucks in this one entity, so I'm going to take this problem and I'm just going to stick it right over here. I'm not going to really deal with it, but it's there. And over time, it just grows, and it starts taking over, and they don't realize how much it's taken over because it's so slow how it manifests itself. And then everything kind of just falls apart, and it has to do with this one little thing that they tucked away a long time ago. So if a person
it's like a cancer that grows, for metaphorically.
Yeah, it is something very small. You just kind of put it away. I'm not going to deal with it. And dealing with it just means talking about it and understanding it and accepting it for what it is. Through therapy usually is the best way, honestly, to do that. But if you're super sensitive about something and you see this as a pattern, I don't know if I would necessarily attribute it to ADHD. I don't really understand that connection so much unless it's because of medication, because the medication and caffeine can really crank up your awareness and your focus, and you can get like stuck on what somebody might say, or a word, or a inflection in their voice. That kind of stuff can happen. And if that wasn't happening before the medication, then I would say go back to your prescriber and tell them what's happening, because that means you're taking too much.
Okay. Journaling also can be good for just having something to go back to. Like, I felt bad on this day. I had these. I took my meds. This is the day I didn't take the meds, and I felt like this, or whatever.
It can be. That's that pattern. That's that habit of self-reflection, and a lot of people, they don't see value in it, so they don't take time to actually do self-reflection. If I can even get someone just to write their stuff down and never look at it again, that's also very helpful, just because it dumps it from their brain.
Yeah, I've heard other people call it just a mind dump. Just write down whatever's going on, just write it down. And I think nowadays, paper is a really good way to do this, as opposed to anything electronic. If you want things more, keep things more confidential, a piece of paper, this thing is, I don't think they have a spyware on this yet. Unless somebody comes into your house.
And that really, and I agree with that, but I also think that you got to use what you're going to use.
Sure.
So
fair
if
enough,
you're a person who that little thingy that you were just raising up, like, they don't even own one of those. Like, what is that?
What is that?
So if all they've got and all they're willing to use is electronics, that's what I tell them. But it's just a matter of getting it out of here and into something else.
Sure. Because if it keeps going around and around, it just gets kind of weirder each time and more.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Got you.
Right.
Got you. Totally. We have about 7 minutes left. Is there anything that let me take a look at that now. I didn't really live comments. I'm trying to look at what other people are saying. Is there anything else that just in general about toxic relationships? Go ahead.
Yes. So if you are in a relationship that you feel unsafe in, that's a whole nother realm. And I do want to make sure that people are aware of what they can do for that. Because this is a global community, there is websites and such that you can go to. You can just Google certainly that you need help, you're in a bad relationship, or you feel unsafe. Toxic relationships are called that because they are toxic. They are painful and dangerous to your life. If you can't make any changes and you don't see any changes happening, then my advice would be to leave that relationship. So if you feel like you're in a place where you can't leave that relationship, you're frightened, then reaching out to the different social agencies that you have in your local communities is a good idea. If you're in the United States, you certainly can always reach out to any of the emergency rooms or hospitals or police stations. There's also hotlines for safe houses and such. If you think that you need to leave and you're not sure how, there's also help for that as well. It's just, I recommend people talking to a healthcare person, because healthcare usually has, in the local communities, they'll have lots of resources available. It changes from culture to culture. Some cultures are like, that's just how it is, man, and you have to live with it. And then other cultures, you have more freedom to leave. It's although we've had fun having fun of it, it's really hell when you're living it, and nobody should have to live in that kind of relationship. If you are looking for an exit plan, you need to start making an exit plan, whether it's saving money, finding someone you can stay with, whatever it is that you have to do to get out of that relationship. If you're in a job relationship and it's toxic, you need to give your notice and go get another job.
Or make a plan to get the other job. Yeah, all this stuff. Yeah, have an exit plan.
Yes, don't live stuck. Don't live in a place where you are just miserable and that's your lot in life. I don't believe that I don't believe that you're predestined to be miserable.
I wholeheartedly agree with you on that.
So people who say that to me, that's their core belief, and that's kind of something we have to work through in therapy. But personally, I don't believe that anybody should be miserable. There's times in our life, certainly, that we're going to be unhappy and we're going to be grieving and those kind of things. But if you're in a relationship that you are fearful or you are, emotionally, you just feel like you're a wreck because of it, you need to make that exit strategy and start planning your way out.
I would wholeheartedly agree. And as somebody who used to be a newspaper photographer and saw lots of stuff,
oh yeah,
things get bad. And another place you can go, we used to tell this, I learned this one, is if you're driving and there's a weirdo following you, especially this is for women, that could be anything, fire stations are usually a good place to go, actually, because many times there are firefighters there, unless they're all out of the house, and usually firefighters
that's a good idea.
Really good guys, but that's like in an emergency situation. But if you're I also come across people, if there's usually, at least in like Anglophone countries, there are helplines that you can call, just like at the local community one,
right.
Whomever, just to get you, if it's really bad, sometimes you need to get out today, like now,
right.
Like you need to grab your stuff and go, then go. Hopefully it doesn't get to that situation, but sometimes it really does. Okay, sometimes, especially if people are violent or something, get out and get help. Because it really is, and it's a tough process, and it's also a tough thing to have to do. I mean, just in general, to find that courage in yourself to break this. Because it does take courage, but just do it. Because you're living in hell now, all right? So, well, Frances, thank you very much. This is a very interesting discussion. As someone said here, Neshi said, yes, I believe something making reference to you're not an MD. No, Frances, you're a
NP.
Excuse me, or what?
I'm an NP.
NP, nurse practitioner.
A nurse practitioner.
Which is
I'm not a physician. I'm an advanced practice nurse.
Advanced practice nurse. Okay. In psychiatry.
Yes.
Which is medical science.
Yeah.
As opposed to psychiatry, which is not medical.
No, psychiatry is a medical doctor.
Psychology.
Psychology is therapy, like Freud, which I do that.
Okay. Now these words get confusing to stuff. Anyway, so how can people, if people want to contact you, how can they contact you?
Well, the best way to do that is through my website. So I have a website. I have an online practice. It's called Precision Mental Performance.
Mental Performance. And
I recently, like last week, started a YouTube channel called Ask Frances. And Ask Frances, and it's where people can post in the comments questions that they want me to answer related to mental health.
Okay.
So that way, and then, yes, okay. I was going to tell you also my email address is just Frances at Precision Mental Performance.
Precision Mental Performance.
Yes, it's a mouthful.
Let me say it in the radio voice. PrecisionMentalPerformance.com. Frances, spelled like France with an S at the end. Ask Frances.
Yes.
As opposed to this other Frances.
And Ask Frances is so there's another Ask Frances on YouTube. It's a very large, angry man who cusses a lot. That's not me.
Excuse me. Yeah, and like, okay, my name's Paul Crouse, and if you Google me, I'm not the guy with the fraud conviction, insurance fraud conviction in Florida. That's a different Paul Crouse. So my name is Paul Crouse. You can contact me if you want to change your life in more of a different way than with Frances. You can contact me at paulcrouse.com or tootallpaul.com or anywhere on the social media universe that we have. And we need to get offline. So may all your relationships be healthy, happy, and loving. Thank you very much, Frances. Thanks everybody for watching and listening. Cheers. Bye-bye.